Hey, what's up everyone? Today we'll be looking at Miirym Sentinel Worm, and it's going to be another budget dragon tribal deck. So the budget today is going to be $50. I know that's a little bit high, but dragons, they tend to be a little bit expensive, not only in the mana side, but the money side as well. So our commander is going to be Miirym. She is a 6 mana dragon spirit with flying and ward, and it also has the ability, whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of it, except the token isn't legendary if that dragon is legendary. So that legendary clause is really important, not only to, create copies of your legendary dragons, but because a lot of good dragons are actually legendary. Ward is also pretty helpful because, hey, people want to kill your dragon that's copying every other dragon, and flying is of course a staple of all dragons. So our ramp package is going to be huge. Spoiler alert, it's 20 ramp spells here. So let's get through them. Explore, Growth Spiral, and Rampant Growth. Standard ramp spells, very cheap, very efficient, all costing 2 mana. Next we have Cultivate, Far Wanderings, and Harrow. Cultivate gets us a card into our hand, very good. Also Cultivate is still a little bit on the cheaper side, closer to $1. Far Wanderings will get us 3 basic lands if we somehow have 7 cards or more in your graveyard. That's pretty unlikely unless you're using Harrow to put a land from your battlefield into your graveyard. Harrow is also instant speed, and it puts the 2 lands into play untapped. Nissa's Pilgrimage, another great ramp spell. It's only going to get us basic forests, but hey, what you going to do? It's basically Cultivate, Ranger's Path again. It's going to get us 2 forest cards from the battlefield and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Explore the Underdark is going to get us 2 lands, preferably gates, onto the battlefield, and then taking the initiative usually causes us to get a basic land into our hand and then possibly lose it immediately. But if you have massive dragons, hopefully you can just gain the initiative back immediately on your turn. And then last but not least, we have Carnelian Orb of Dragonkind. I say last as in this is the only orb we play. There's 2 more orbs, they're green and blue respectively. This one is actually the best hands down. So it has the ability tap, add a red. If that mana is spent on a dragon creature spell, it gains haste until end of turn. So Carnelian Orb of Dragonkind is a 3 mana haste generator, which by the way, if you know all the haste generators, most of them cost about 3. I know Lightning Greaves and the equipment, those are kind of the exception. They cost 1 additional, but Orb of Dragonkind will cost 0 additional, and it's a 3 mana rock. Next we have Midnight Clock as our other 3 mana rock. It has the ability to put an hour counter at the beginning of each upkeep, and eventually it's going to refill your hand. Very nice when you basically don't have that much card draw. It kind of pulls double duty in this deck. Next we have Font of Fertility and Wild Growth being just a standard staple of all EDH decks. Font of Fertility here is just a really bad Wayfarer's Bauble. Next we have Fertile Ground, Overgrowth, and Weirding Wood. This enchantment package is going to help us get a bunch of mana. Fertile Ground is also going to fix our mana, and Weirding Wood is going to fix our mana and draw us 1 card with the clue. And next we have Frontier Siege. Frontier Siege is a 4 mana enchantment and has the ability, as Frontier Siege enters the battlefield, choose Khans or Dragons. Khans, at the beginning of each of your main phases, add green to your mana pool, and Dragons, whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, you may have it fight target creature you don't control. So, in most decks, you always choose Khans. It's kind of a no-brainer, especially since green decks don't have that many flying creatures, but our deck is, strangely enough, a dragon tribal deck, and most dragons actually do have flying, even if they're green. So, there's kind of a choice here. Realistically though, you're probably going to choose Khans. Next, we have our Mana Dork, Scaled Nurturer, a 2 mana Mana Dork. It has the ability add green when you tap it, and when you spend this mana to cast a dragon creature spell, you gain 2 life. Next, we have Nimbleclaw Adept. It has the ability Bigsby's Hand. Tap, untap 2 other target permanents, activate only as a sorcery and only once each turn. I know that sounds pretty bad, but if you have any sort of permanent that taps for more than 2, something like Temple of the False God or any of those auras that enchant lands, you're going to be generating more than 2 mana for this 4 mana Dragon Wizard. And next we have Savage Ventmaw. It's a 6 mana 4/4 flying dragon, and it has the ability whenever Savage Ventmaw attacks, add 3 red and 3 green mana. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as Steps and Phases end, so it basically refunds itself if you manage to attack with it. Hopefully you gave it haste. Gainax Astral Hunter has the ability flying. Whenever Gainax Astral Hunter or another dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a treasure token. And it also has the ability to choose a background, which is not really relevant for this deck. So Gainax is very, very strong because with our commander, Gainax will enter the battlefield, create a copy of itself, and then the copy will not be legendary. So immediately you're going to generate 1 treasure for itself, 1 treasure from the copy, and the copy will generate a treasure for seeing itself. And then every time you cast another dragon and then have it enter, it's going to generate 2 treasures because there are 2 Gainaxes, and then the copy will generate 2 treasures because there's the other copy entering. Basically, every time you have a dragon that's not a token enter, you're going to get 4 treasures. Basically refunding every dragon for 4 mana. Absolutely insane in this deck. Next we have our card draw. So card draw will be Fact or Fiction. It's just a cheap, efficient way to draw three cards. Usually they're pretty bad cards, but hey, the other 2 will go to your graveyard. Speaking of graveyards, Ignite the Future and Once in Future. Wow, we are really into the future here because both of these really rely on having a good graveyard. You don't feel free to bin Ignite the Future and use Once in Future to get Fact or Fiction back into your hand. Ignite the Future has the ability to exile top 3 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. So ideally you wait until turn 5, you play Ignite the Future, and you play a land from the top 3. If you miss, well, you miss. And then the 8 mana version, when flashbacking, it's going to let you cast those spells for free. Once in Future is just a cheap and efficient way to get 2 cards from your graveyard to your hand at instant speed. That might matter because we do run counter spells. Escape to the Wilds is a 5 mana draw 5. It also lets us play an extra land. Genesis Ultimatum, look at the top 5, put any number of permanent cards from among them onto the battlefield and the rest into your hand. Exile Genesis Ultimatum. So you're not going to reveal the top 5, you're going to look at the top 5 and shove any permanents you want onto the battlefield. And because all your creatures are dragons and they cost generally 5 or more, that's going to be an amazing value if you at least put 2 dragons into play. Treasure Cruise, once again, great spell. Draw 3 cards for 1 blue. Ideally, you put a bunch of stuff into your graveyard. Probably ramp spells. Next, we have Garruk's Uprising. All our dragons basically have 4 or greater power, and this will also trigger on tokens. So, once again, great synergy with Miirym, also giving all your creatures with power 4 or greater trample. Actually, that's just all creatures. Never mind. All your creatures just have trample forever. Next, we have Future Sight. Future Sight is a very efficient card draw spell. It's going to reveal every counter spell you draw. So if you draw 4 cards, it's going to reveal every single card. That's just how Future Sight works, but hey, it's probably worth the cost. Sunbird's Invocation has the ability whenever you cast a spell from your hand, so not top of your deck, you're going to reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is that spell's mana value. You may cast the spell with mana value X or less from among the cards revealed this way without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom in random order. So basically, every spell you have has Cascade, sort of. It has to be X or less, so you can actually match the exact mana value. And most dragons cost a ton of mana, so if you untap with Sunbirds, your opponents are in for a world of hurt. Finally, we have some card draw dragons. Backdraft Hellgate will give all of our instants and sorceries flashback. We do run a ton of instant and sorceries. Some of them actually draws card, but most of them actually just ramp. It's probably worth it. Miirym is very easy, very simple. Basically, it just says when it does combat damage to a player, you draw a card, and then if you somehow have fewer than 3 cards in your hand, you'll draw cards equal to the difference. That's very unlikely, especially if you're attacking with 2 Miiryms. So the first Miirym, let's pretend you're empty-handed. You're going to draw a card, then draw up to 3. The copy of Miirym will then resolve, and that's just going to draw you a card. So at best, you're going to get to up to hand size 4. More likely, you're just going to draw 2. But 5 mana 5/5, draw a card whenever you do damage. That's probably worth it. And it's actually one of the few dragons that actually draws cards. Next we have Kyrie, the Swirling Sky. Where when it dies, you're probably going to choose the second option, which is mill 6 cards and then return 2 instants and or sorceries from your graveyard to your hand. Dragon Mage is going to be a 7 mana 5/5 flying. When it deals combat damage to a player, each player discards the hand, draws 7 cards. Funny enough, if you have a copy of this, we're going to do that twice. So if you have some instant speed tricks, you can cast them in between, but otherwise this is just going to fill your graveyard a ton for Treasure Cruise. Next, we have our one-sided board wipe. So Draconic Intervention is going to do X damage to each non-dragon creature. So notably, it's not going to kill all of our ground dragons, but we have to exile an instant or sorcery from our graveyard. Speaking of instants or sorceries to exile, we have Disaster Radius, 7 mana spell. As an additional cost to cast this creature spell, reveal a creature card from your hand, and it's going to do X damage to each creature your opponents control, where X is the revealed card's converted mana cost. So converted mana cost, or mana value, that's probably going to be 5 to 7. Dragons tend to cost a lot, but hey, maybe it could even be 15 damage. Next, we have some single target and multi-targeted removal. Mind Harness. It's a play only on a red or green creature. It has cumulative upkeep, and then you gain control of enchanted creature. So ideally, you play Mind Harness on an opponent's red or green creature that's actually important. Ideally, maybe it's a commander, and then you're going to control it until you can no longer pay for Mind Harness, or Mind Harness falls off somehow. Since you're a heavy ramp deck, that means you have like 20 plus ramp spells, you can pay this for basically the rest of the game. If it gets too much, then you can use Sarkhan's Unsealing or Warstorm Surge to kill your own creature. So Sarkhan's Unsealing says, whenever you cast a creature spell with power 4, 5, or 6, it'll do 4 damage to any target. And then whenever you cast a creature spell with power 7 or greater, it's going to do 4 damage to each opponent, each creature, and planeswalker they control. There's actually not that many creatures with 7 or greater power in our deck, so that last part is probably not going to happen. Warstorm Surge, classic 6 mana enchantment. It says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Just an efficient way to end the game and also control the board. Next, we have some unusual ways to control the board with Vengeful Ancestor. It's a 4 mana, surprisingly flying, Dragon Spirit. And it has, whenever a Vengeful Ancestor enters the battlefield or attacks a goad target creature, whenever a goaded creature attacks, it deals 1 damage to its controller. So Vengeful Ancestor is going to redirect some of your opponent's creatures towards some of your other opponents. Lozan Dragon's Legacy is basically another Warstorm Surge. It says, whenever you cast an adventure spell or dragon spell, Lozan's Dragon's Legacies deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to any target that isn't a commander. So if you have 2 of these, you're going to be double pinging creatures or planeswalkers or players equal to the mana value of your dragon spells. Now that is pretty sweet. Unfortunately though, it is a 5 mana 4/2 flying dragon. Not exactly the greatest stats. Scourge of Outcast is our expensive dragon for today. It's a 5 mana 4/4 flying dragon, and it has whenever Scourge of Outcast or another dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of dragons you control. So X is probably going to be about 3, because when you cast Scourge of Outcast with Miirym on the battlefield already, you're going to have Scourge of Outcast enter. Both Miirym and itself will trigger, and then you're going to create a copy of Scourge of Outcast, and it's going to see that itself and Scourge, so you're going to be dealing 3 damage to 3 targets. Pretty insane with Miirym. Next, we have some more removal with Kega the Tide Star and Ryusei the Falling Star. Kega has, when it dies, gain control of target creature, so a bit of a permanent mind control. Ryusei has, whenever it dies, it deals 5 damage to each creature without flying, and most of our dragons fly. Next, we have some more removal with Dracosath and Full Razor Region. Dracosath has an attack trigger that will deal 4 damage and 3 damage of each up to 2 other targets. Wow, what a mouthful. Basically, it's going to do 4 damage and then 3 damage and then 3 damage to any target. Full Razor Region has 7, it's a 7 mana 4/5, and then when it enters, it'll fight any creature you don't control, and then it's going to put 2 counters on itself. Thunder Dragon, more removal again. So when it enters, it does 3 damage to each creature without flying. Hopefully that's good enough. It's not exactly one of the better removal spells. Furnace Dragon is a 9 mana 5/5. It has affinity for artifacts, which we have 2 artifacts. Flying, when Furnace Dragon comes into play, if you played it from your hand, remove all artifacts from the game. This is pretty backbreaking for any artifact deck, and we actually just have 9 mana, alright? We're just supposed to get up to 9 mana. Breath of Daragas is a 2 mana kicker spell. And it has the ability Breath of Daragas deals 1 damage to each creature without flying in each player. That is a pretty bad mode, but if you kick it, it'll do 4 damage to each creature without flying each player instead. And one thing you may have noticed is almost all of our dragons fly, so this is going to be a one-sided board wipe more times than not. Now we have our counterspell package. We have Dispel, Negate, and Silumgar's Scoring. Silumgar's Scoring is just an unusual counterspell unless you reveal a dragon from your hand, and you also have to control a dragon, right? If you reveal the dragon or control the dragon as you cast it, so then it's going to be a counterspell. Otherwise, it's just going to counter it if your opponent doesn't pay 1. So make sure you have a dragon. Negate, counter target non-creature spell, and Dispel counters an instant. Last but not least is our classic Aetherize. Aetherize always works, and don't let anyone tell otherwise. Finally, we have some miscellaneous dragons that don't actually fall into any particular category. Thrakkus the Butcher has a 5-mana Trampler, and it has the ability, whenever Thrakkus attacks, double the power of all dragons you control, kind of similar to a Tarka World Render, which will give all your dragons double strike whenever a dragon attacks. Skyland Despot is a 7-mana 5/5. It gives you Monarchy, which actually with your big fat dragons, you might be able to keep. And then beginning of your upkeep, if you're the Monarch, you get a 5/5 dragon. Earthquake Dragon is our very expensive 15 mana 10/10. One of the few dragons with 7 power or more. And it has Flying Trample, and it also is big. That's about it. Don't worry about that last ability, it probably won't come up. And then this is a Possibility Storm deck, so you might be wondering why run Possibility Storm when we ourselves are running Counterspell. Honestly, we only run 3 counterspells. That's not exactly a huge counterspell package. So whenever you're fighting against combo decks or counterspell decks, Possibility Storm is massive control against those players. And most of your dragons are pretty amazing anyway. So casting a random dragon from when you cast a creature spell from your hand is basically fine. Locks Down Warhammer is just a way to gain life. And then Fires of Yavimaya is a way to give your dragons haste. It also has a side utility ability, which probably won't come up. Finally, we're getting into the lands. So we have 39 lands, very high land count, and we're 3 colors, so we need a ton of non-basic lands. Cinderglade is a mountain forest, so you can fetch it for any ability that lets you fetch non-basic forests. Frontier Bivouac is just a 3-color land, and Gruul Turf is just a way to draw cards, sort of. Highland Forest, again, it has the great basic land type forest. Izzet Boilerworks is another bounce land, and then Izzet Guildgate is a guild gate. Mossfair Valley, very cheap land. Mossfort Bridge is a forest, basically, not literally, and then it enters the battlefield tap, and it has Hideaway Forward. And then you can play the exile card without paying its mana cost if creatures you control have total power 10 or greater. That's pretty easy. You just need Miirym plus any other dragon, essentially, because when you cast the dragon, Miirym is going to copy that dragon, and there's almost no dragons with 2 or less power. A big important note about Hideaway is that you can play the Hideaway spell at instant speed as long as it is not a land. All right, lands are the one exception for these Hideaway lands. Path of Ancestry is a scry land if we cast a dragon spell. Otherwise, it's just a tap 3-color land. Rhinewood Falls is another land with the forest type, and Spinerock Knoll, basically a staple of all red decks. The problem is, of course, budget reasons. So you can play the exiled spell without paying its mana cost as long as an opponent was dealt 7 or more damage. Miirym does 6 damage if you notice, so you just need a little more than just Miirym. Next we have 2 temples, Temple of Abandon and Temple of Epiphany. I'm not sure why the 3rd temple isn't included. I assume it is not included for budgetary reasons. We're missing the red green? Red blue? No. Oh, I guess this is all the temples. No, we're missing the green blue temple. Whatever. That's probably an oversight. And then last but not least, we have Unclaimed Territory. It is a creature land. Basically, you need to choose a creature type, and then it will add mana of that color. Vivid lands, they're cheap. They tap for all 3 colors, and there's no other synergy really, no way to get back the charge counters. You just play them because you got it. Next, we have our staples, Command Tower, Evolving Wilds, Exotic Orchard. These are the staples because We play them in every deck, and Miirym is no exception. And here's the proof that $50 is our budget. As you can see, Valkas is our most expensive card, and then Imarith itself, Desert Doom. Oh, that's our card draw dragon. Unfortunately, it's $2-ish. There's no other replacement for Imarith because you really need card draw in this deck, and it is a dragon. Miirym herself is a very fat and very expensive dragon. Drakaseth always hovering around $1.25, and Skyline Despot probably close to $1. Earthquake Dragon also edging over $1. So if you stay tuned, I will probably remake this deck to be a little bit cheaper than $50, but dragons are just inherently an expensive archetype, and when you don't have a lot of money to spend on the good dragons, these are the dragons you're just gonna be left with. That's all for today, folks.